Hello and welcome to another episode of Brand Retro. Today we have on guest Katie Mleziva. I did say that correctly. Katie, welcome to the podcast and thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Mike. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about what you do and real food brands. This was an interesting concept to me when we came across your profile and going to have you on, is that I love what you're doing in the branding space, but I also love the fact that you're very niche and very dialed in on food brands.
Yeah. So I work with primarily smaller, early stage natural food brands and sustainable farmers who are selling products off of their farm. So I started my career in big food and was in the corporate world for a long time, moved away from the Chicago area and was ready for a career change and had kids, and eventually decided that I wanted to focus on consulting. And so I started working on my own. At first, I wasn't focused on food brands, even though I have a passion for food and wanted to take my big food experience and bring it to smaller brands. I, as it happens sometimes when you're going out on your own, you take the work that is in front of you and you're getting referrals, and it's great. I got busy enough though that I was like, you know what, my passion is really to help more people get access to real food. And I've seen in my own family what a difference the food that we eat makes. And for multiple reasons, I just decided that it was the right time to niche down. And we can talk more about that. It was not an overnight change. It took a little while to make that pivot, both for myself and to get traction in that niche. But I'm so glad I did, because it's just been so much fun.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that, because I definitely understand what you're talking about in the fact that you set course, you start your business, you have a direction and a goal. And at first it's crickets, right? You're like, well, how come this isn't working? And you have to take the time to figure out how to talk to those people and how to attract those right people. So tell me a little bit about that. And then also, sure. Who's an ideal for you? What's an ideal client look like?
The idea of the pivot was basically, I don't know what exactly the percentage was over time that I, slowly started switching. I started putting my focus into talking with the people that I would want to be working with, hanging out in, those sort of trade organizations and local food industry groups and things like that. And, at first, it's just funny because I knew what I brought to the table, but nobody else, until they know you, they don't understand that you're not just trying to sell them something, that you're really there because you want to be a part of the industry and make a difference. And so it took a little while until they thought, oh, okay, she's still hanging around. So I guess my takeaway there is that when you're making a pivot, you can't just go to a meeting or two for a trade industry and have them think that, right away notice you, that you've got to actually participate and be part of the conversation and show that you're part of, want to be part of that group. And then over time, it kind of catches on. You show up, they start to refer you, they ask you to be a mentor, you start to meet people and you refer people to them. And, the whole thing just starts to fall into place with a lot of work in between, and letting go of some clients that weren't then in that niche. And, it isn't easy to let go of clients who you like working with. You've probably been there too. As you start to focus on certain things, you move away from other types of work. And, that transition is not easy, but I'm so glad when I was able to do that, because it frees you up, for the things that you're heading towards.
Calibrating your client mix and calibrating whether or not they're the right fit client for where you want your business to go is a common practice of, it's what we do every year at CyberDogs. We almost do a little purge or a cleanse just to make sure that, we're heading in the right direction, because when you're working with clients, you do favors and you get sucked into different situations where you just want to help the client and you want to help, these people meet their goals. But then you got to come back to kind of your center and go, well, I don't know if that's helping my direction or helping my bigger goal. So you got to kind of be aware of that. But
exactly.
So the question I had around your industry or your niche is that, and this might be an assumption, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would assume that as you went into that niche or into that direction, you probably came across a lot of potential clients that maybe didn't understand the value of branding and really what you brought to the table, right? So you had to build up probably a little bit of a resume and a track record to then show potential clients, here's what I can do for you.
Yes.
Correct?
Oh, it's so true, because my end of the work is really focused on the brand strategy part of it. All of the thinking work. I wish I was a designer. I love seeing the ideas come to life. That's not my focus. My focus is on the strategic end of it. So we, things like who's your ideal consumer and what are their pain points and what's your competitive set look like? What are your company advantages? I know that these are all things that you look at too. I like to say, how are we going to meet your consumers' needs in a way that your competitors either can't or won't? And so we've got a little Venn diagram and we look at that. But the idea that people want to know, well, what should my story be and what should my message be? And sure, we could sit down and look at that based on where you are today, but we don't know if that is compelling and relevant and differentiated unless you take those few steps back and look at go through the process to really figure out if you're talking about the right things to the right people at the right time of their journey. So yes, you are 100% right that people need to, sometimes you have to show people what they want and then also show them how to get there, and then they understand it. And once I go through the process with people, they are, it's so much more than they ever thought they would get out of it. And they really see how, when they are working with a designer or a website designer, or, frankly, even like a product formulation, if they're redoing some of their products or creating new products, I always say that it's the front and the back end of your business. It's not just the marketing side of things. You really have to deliver products that align with your brand strategy as well. So yes, totally. Once they get it and they love it and they tell their friends, but it is a little bit hard at first for people to not just want to jump into the tactics, because action feels really good. Like they feel like they're making progress just because they're doing things.
Yeah, and I've found that in lots of other industries, but specifically like in that agriculture, more blue collar industry. Sometimes they have a certain amount of success with doing nothing, and what I mean by that is that they're just working the system, they're working their connections, and they don't do anything from a brand or marketing creative perspective, and they're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
So what they kind of convince themselves of is that, hey, I'm doing this well without it. Why do I need it? And my argument, or my, kind of discovery process with them is that, yeah, no, just imagine how well you'd do if you had it. Like, imagine what you would do if you were the first guy that actually developed a strategy behind what you're doing, and a strategy behind your brand, and a visualization as to what consumers are expecting of you. Like, I think there's a missing piece there that people like you and myself have to kind of educate them on. And if they're not used to it, especially if it's an industry that doesn't really focus on that kind of stuff, we have to kind of step up to the plate and be the ones to kind of drag them through that process and say, trust me, it matters, right?
Right. That transformation of you're here now and where you can be, and this is how it's going to make your life easier. And I think, frankly, I don't always focus on all of those things that are going to be easier on the other side, once you help them over the river. And I need to do a better job of that sometimes also, because everything really does get easier for them. It's not like having a business is easy once you've done this work, but you've connected the dots, and then when you're making decisions, you know what those key pieces of your strategy are, so you're not recreating the wheel every time. And that's why I guess I said, when they get it, they get it. But you're right. It takes some trust on their part too, to understand, that we're really trying to help make things easier for them. If you take a little bit of time now to do the work, it really pays off later.
Yeah. And I think once they feel that next level success, or they feel that efficiency start to kind of work in their favor, it frees up so much brain space from more the survival mindset to the creative mindset. Because that's the big thing with a lot of companies when they start, or at least the clients I've worked with, is that a lot of them have a survival mindset at the beginning, because it's like, hey, I'm self-employed, I got to grind, I got to do all these things.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's a very finite way to think, because they're just working to survive. They're just trying to get the stuff done so they can hit that next month or that year goal or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Once they can kind of back burner that stress and go, okay, we're doing well, work's coming in. I don't have to worry about surviving anymore. I don't have to look over my shoulder for that next project. Now what can I do? And when they graduate to that next level thinking, that's when they can really start to dig in on that strategy, and they can get creative and start to really become aware of, maybe some missed opportunities.
Right. Yeah. Maybe where those dots aren't connecting in the right places or at the right times. Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, because a lot of times people will come to me when they're looking to get to the next level. That phrase that what got you here won't get you there. So whether it's going from like nothing to startup, or local to regional, or regional to national, there's those points that I think maybe you're referring to too, where you've got some success behind you, but you need something, you could be more efficient, or maybe it starts that your visuals aren't where you think, your visual brand isn't where you think it should be, but then you go to someone, you go to a designer and they say, well, what are you looking for? And you're like, well, I don't know. So you have to take a step back and do some of that thinking. And that's where I see a lot of people saying, okay, now is the right time. It's at different growth points, but when they're looking to make a change and they don't know how to get there, taking that pause.
Yeah. So what do you look for ideally in a client, and what do you feel like the most, what are the top 2, 3, 4 things that you feel are missed from a strategy perspective?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I always like people who have a passion and a vision. And so that comes in different packages. It looks different ways. Some people are so outward about it. Some people you have to draw it apart a little bit. But I have never really had to say this, but I've thought it that like I can't make up a passion for you. Like I can help you put the pieces together, but if you're not passionate about growing a business for some reason, I can't craft that for you. But I can help draw all of the pieces out of your head and look at the market opportunity, and we can put all of these things together, define your consumer, and we can work with that. But it's got to be somebody who has a vision of where they want to go, and then also, feels passionate behind that for some reason. And the key things I think that are, I sort of mentioned it a little bit, but one of the biggest issues that I see is that people will just skip right to the tactics. They just miss the strategic part altogether, or it's in their head. I guess that's the other piece, is that these are all smart people, right? Like you can't not be smart and be running a business to some degree anyway. And so it's just that a lot of the times, if it's just in your head, you're missing some of the benefit that comes from actually putting words to paper or typing or whatever. There's something that happens when it comes from your brain, and you have to find words and you start to synthesize all those thoughts that are in your head. And so that is one of the biggest things that I think people miss, is actually doing the work in the first place, or thinking that they've done it because it's just in their heads. And really thinking through what makes your company different, and who you're serving, and how what your competitors are doing out there. Because one of the biggest things that I hear is somebody will say something and they think that it's a competitive difference, but then once we start to dig into it, everyone's really saying that. And so then it doesn't mean you can't say that also. It just means that it can't be the thing that you hang your hat on. So actually doing the work, I guess, is part of it. Really, you might think of one thing in your head, but looking to see what's out there, even if you don't have the formal process to go through, just making sure that you're looking at those 3 things is a place to start.
I would even add to that I think important element to not only being an entrepreneur starting a business, or even being a marketing professional, is that none of what we do is black and white. It's all layers. Yeah. It's all an evolution. It's all, you hate to say, well, I'm learning as I go, but you should be. You should be figuring it out as you go, to either capture and replicate success when you have it, or to figure out how to duplicate it in another industry or in another situation. And I think a lot of times clients or customers, or just the person who's kind of tasked with, kind of starting that business or that campaign, that initiative, they think it's a black and white. Well, I've done this, now I need to do this. And it's like, well, sort of, but you also need to keep your eye on that to make sure that what you decided there was the right direction. It's layers and it's a process. Yes. And when you're working with somebody like yourself, be open to that. Understand that, hey, we're going to try to hit as many home runs as we can, but the idea is that we figure out how to hit home runs so that we can hit them at will.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, I like that. That is a great analogy. The idea of, I always say that my process is linear. It works if you go in order, but then it's circular. You've got to go back and tie everything together, and over time revisit. You're kind of making hypothesis and testing it in market and testing and learning and optimizing. So I love the fact how you said it around, like, you're learning how to do this so that you can continue to refine and optimize. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, it's a big animal, and it always is. And I think I think sometimes what gets missed in the marketing world, in the creative process, is we sometimes think that, hey, if I go work with Katie, I'm going to pay her X, Y, and Z, and I'm just going to get that, what I need from her. It's a black and white tangible item. And it's like, no, it's not. It's the beginning of something. It's the creation of a strategy that will eventually evolve. And not that you're not getting your value, because you are, but you have to understand that it's not an open and closed book.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
So tell me a little bit about your process. I know that in looking at your website a little bit, it looks like you go into a lot of different areas, and it looks like you have a pretty robust collection of information and a discovery process that you kind of take into example. So if I'm a listener, if I'm a potential customer, what does this journey look like for me? What can I expect?
The 3 steps in my process are define, align, and activate. And so define can be from scratch, or it could be more refining if you're an existing brand. But the idea is, within the defining phase, that's where we're really setting the brand strategy and documenting it. So that's where we look at those 3 C's that I was talking about: your consumers, your competitors, and your company. And we dig in and really we look at all those areas, and we figure out what your brand pillars are, and your brand personality, and your positioning. And I know I'm throwing some words out there that not everyone might understand, but the idea is that we're really defining what sets your brand apart and how you want to bring it to life. So we look at your purpose and your vision and your values. So we look internally first, and then we look externally to the consumers and the competitors. And then we go back and really say, okay, based on all of that, where you want to go, what's out in the market, and who you're serving, what are the things that are really going to set your brand apart? And then the personality, how do you want it to come to life? I'd say, if you were a person at a party, or if your brand was a person at a party, how would people, what would they think, and what would their impression be? And that's important, because we always want to, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but we always want to show up consistently and in a cohesive way. So these pieces set the strategic foundation, and they also help bridge towards when you would be working towards with a creative partner. And so that's the defining part of it. You're really laying out the strategy of what you want your brand to stand for and how you want to stand out in the market. And then we talk about aligning. That's where my brand management background comes into play, because I think of you as the business manager, like a hub, the business owner. And then you think about all the different areas of your business that you would align with your brand strategy. So it's not just marketing. It's what are you doing on the back end and the front end to help bring your brand to life. And then the activate phase is where we say, okay, based on which area we really need to drill into, let's say marketing, let's prioritize these different areas so that you can have a really tactical plan to say, here's what we're going to go after first. And then if we need to build capacity or capabilities in order to do that, how would we do that, either through internal or external partners? So that's the define, align, and activate process. And there's a couple of different ways that I bring that to life. Then one is one-on-one work, and one is through a more on-demand course that people can take on their own, and then they can add one-on-one sessions if they want. But it's the same process that I use and guide people through, whether it's the on-demand course or our one-on-one work together.
So typically, does a client then come back to you for the execution piece of it, or do they take that homework, that playbook, that work that you've done with them, and then what do they do with it once they get that from you?
Yes, good question. That is why I love having partners, because I will refer people out. Sometimes they've got people that can help them bring it to life, but often they'll say to me, who do you know, who do you trust? And then I'm able to, I'm make sure that I think that it would be a good match before I'm thoughtful, I guess, in who I connect people with on both sides. With my marketing and creative partners, I want to make sure that it's a good fit too, because I don't want to be, spending anybody's time on things that aren't going to be a good relationship or a good fit for them. But yes, I am not a creative person. I every now and then have a clever idea, but I have those partners that I refer people to once the strategy piece of it is done. And then to your point, some people do say, okay, well, I want to meet once a month or twice a month or every week while I'm doing the execution piece, to have me be sort of an internal sounding board so that I can help them. They just want that extra confidence and kind of sounding board to help bring it to life from making sure it's aligned to the strategy.
And I can say this a lot more bluntly because I'm not you, but to the clients out there, to anybody listening to this, like if you're paying somebody like Katie to do this strategy work and to figure out the details, and if you're asking her to crawl through the trenches with you, do yourself a favor and keep her on retainer something. Just keep her in the mix so that as you start to develop the execution side and the tactical side of building this stuff out, the person who helped you crack the code and kind of develop the strategy, just do yourself a favor and keep her in the mix until you feel like it's been given birth to, or that it's come to fruition. Because I see it a lot with clients. I've seen it in my past lives. If you let those people go too soon and you don't know how to communicate all that work that went into it, you're going to miss the mark at some point. And it's really important because you've done all that work now. You've really, put in the back end education and the discovery piece to what is going to be your brand. And to lose that is tragic. So just a plug for Katie, keep her in the conversation because it's wildly important.
Thanks, Mike. I do think that's true. There's value there. So thank you for that.
There is, because what we see sometimes is, maybe the plan or the strategy gets shelved because for whatever reason, it's like, we'll attack this beginning of next year or whatever it is. Or they'll bring in another partner or somebody to execute, and they'll say, well, we actually have some different ideas on this. And it's just, you're just kind of asking for it. You're leaving the door open for failure. And even if that other partner has another perspective or an idea, it gives the Katie or the whoever that person is, it gives that person a chance to communicate the vision so that other person can either get it or not get it, or a collaboration might form from it. But as a client, that's the message to the client or the potential customer, is that don't leave that gap in communication out there for somebody to misinterpret or reinterpret it, because you don't want to spend that money twice.
That is a very good point. Yes, that example did happen not too long ago, where she was going to, we had every intention of keeping the loop, but she got busy. She started working with a web designer, and they spun their wheels for a little bit, where if we would have had one call, it could have, I could have explained why we were thinking about it the way we were. And I love other people building on our ideas. I mean, so I'm totally collaborative, open to that, but it could have saved her a lot of time and money, I think. So that's a good example.
Well, and what the client has to remember, or what, the potential customer has to remember, is it's not a matter of Mike being right or Katie being right or somebody else being right. It's that Mike or Katie, whoever that person is, went through that discovery with you. The answers came from you, the customer.
Right.
It's a question of you being right versus this new opinion.
Yeah.
You're just having Katie or Mike or whoever that person is representing you at that time. So as we naturally do, we're human, right? We second guess ourselves. Don't second guess all the work that you just put into something just because somebody else said something different. It doesn't mean that person's wrong either.
Right.
It's just saying don't discount all the work you just did because of that other opinion. So it's not a agency versus agency kind of struggle.
Yeah.
It's more of a, let's come back to, I call it the brand retro mindset, but let's come back to the brand retro mindset. Let's come back to the work we already did and start there. And if it evolves from there, great. But let's not reinvent the wheel here, because we were on the right track at least for a while, or at least at one point in time.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of different ways we could all go about our businesses, right? So, I think staying on a track and being cohesive and building that until you get more information from the market that tells you why you should be adapting that, then that's where you start to make adjustments or pivots or agree.
It's just an important public service announcement to follow through with what you started.
Yes. Yes, it takes time sometimes to bring it all to life. And we may say it, 20 times a day as a brand owner, whoever the client is, but we have to remember that the people hearing our messages don't hear it that often. So oftentimes business owners will get, think that the message, they've said it before the market has really heard it the enough times to let it sink in and start to take action.
Right. And I say this to my clients, I say this to my team members. The idea is that I'm not trying to be right, I'm trying to be consistent.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
If I am right in being consistent, then great. If not, then whatever, I don't care. But I'm just trying to be consistent with my message. I'm not trying to win an argument.
Right. Yeah, there's value in consistency for sure.
Niche clients. Tell me a little bit about. I know you'll probably take on all comers, right? But is it farm to table? Is it coffee companies? Is it like what? If you could identify just here's kind of my sweet spot. Here's my niche.
Yeah.
Who are they? What do they look like?
Like I said, in more of the small or earlier stage natural food. And, natural food is a range, right? Like we all have different ideas of what that might mean. And I'm okay with that. I think it's a continuum, and we're, if somebody's moving towards cleaning up a part of the grocery store or moving towards more regenerative farming, that's what I'm working towards. I talk about shaking up shopping carts, and I really want to help people see that there's different options out there. Often it is people who are looking to go from more of a local brand to a regional brand, or somehow expand, it could be through direct to consumer too. Then it's not as much about local versus regional, but looking to take that next step up in terms of growth, and knowing that in order to do that, they need to have a more cohesive story. Like I said, a lot of times it is that somebody wants to know what their story should be. And so then that's why we start back at the beginning to figure that out. That's really, it's people who are looking to shake up the food system and to do things differently. I'm not opposed to working with big brands. My focus is small brands though, because I feel like those are the people who, first of all, don't always have access to the bigger agency budgets. But second of all, that's where a lot of the really cool new ideas are coming from, is smaller brands, and they're more nimble. We can make decisions, we can act on it, back to that testing and learning. So my heart is really with smaller, earlier stage brands. That's just who I choose to work with. But always like people, again, who have a vision and a passion and are, bursting with energy to bring their idea to life. It's almost, trying to think of the right word. It's more than just a job to them most of the time. They live and breathe it.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I've worked with big companies, and I like working with big companies.
Yeah,
it's fine. But I'll be honest, I too have a soft spot for the underdog and for the small companies, because I feel like their stories are a little bit richer. They're a little bit more authentic. And to your point, you can do more with them. Like you can be more creative. You can be more nimble. You can have more fun, because they're typically thinking different anyway. That's kind of why they decided to make the leap, or they decided to start whatever it is they started. So yeah, I mean, as far as filling one's cup, I would say too that I prefer to work with the smaller to medium sized companies, just because they're more rewarding, more fun.
Yeah. And you work with brands all over the country, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it started out, I think that, I think we kind of thought we'd be more regional, more local. And then the more work we did and the more referrals happened and the more people know people, it turned into a kind of a national approach. And at this point, I wouldn't say we target nationally, but we don't not target nationally. So
Yeah.
it just kind of happens the way it happens now.
Yeah. Same.
So yeah, so whenever we get somebody from a new city, new state, whatever, it's like, oh, cool, Utah. All of a sudden it's like we, went into a new area, but it just kind of worked out that way. And what I've really found is that the network or the people know people, and I think they, birds of a feather flock together kind of a
Right.
mindset. That's what has kind of propelled, kind of more the national growth than regional. I'd like to do more regional stuff too, but I'm just kind of steering into the opportunities at the moment, and that's kind of how it works out.
Yeah. Yeah. I love local brands, but I also love working with brands from all over, so I agree that it's kind of fun to see what's going on in other areas of the country, or even I have someone in Scotland, and it's always fun to hear, what's going on. And then you can kind of cross pollinate ideas, what's going on in other areas too. So it's cool.
I will say too, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, but I think we all go into any client relationship thinking we have a very broad and unbiased opinion or perspective, right? But then you really feel or figure out how broad and unbiased you are when you're thrown a curveball from upstate New York, you know what I mean? Or Scotland or whatever it is. It's like, okay, I couldn't have an opinion on this if I wanted to because whatever. So all of a sudden it's like, I am unbiased, and you're able to kind of think through it from a totally different perspective, which, long story short, I think helps refine the process. It helps enrich your discovery process because now you're not, to some degree, polluted or tethered by the regional or the locality of who you're working with that's in your backyard, because we're influenced by it. When these brands or they're very local to you, you can't help but be somewhat influenced or have knowledge of. But when you're thrown a complete curveball from the other side of the country, it's like, okay, I have no choice but to come at this with eyes wide open.
Yeah, that's really an interesting observation, because there's, they're the experts in their business, and there's value in understanding that local or regional or whatever market, but then having the process and fresh eyes that's unbiased too. Yeah, those two together can be a powerful combination. That's a good observation.
Well, because I think you go back to your survival skills. I mean, you have you carry with you a certain amount of marketing knowledge and experiences and whatever that is. And I think sometimes we, for lack of a better description, we somehow take it for granted because we've done this before, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've ridden this bike 1,000 times. I don't have to think about it. Well, all of a sudden you're forced to think about, okay, how do I ride a bike? If I have to actually think about the steps of riding a bike, it's a lot more work than I probably gave credit to, right?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you got to tap into your toolbox and figure out what tools you got to work with. It changes things. And I think it's a good habit, and it's a good exercise to dial in your craft.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Katie, I appreciate you coming on. This was interesting, and I like what you're doing. I spent some time on your website and you're kind of researching you guys, and I think you're on a good path. I think this niche is cool, and I think with everything going on in the food industry and the idea of being more organic, the farm to table stuff, like I think you're in a very good position to help a lot of companies and a lot of startups and a lot of brands.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited about it. I think one of the things that's most exciting is that it really aligns with who I am, what I live and breathe every day, in and outside of work. So yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you know what? Before I let you go, I just want to respond to that you doing that and you kind of steering into your authentic self in your own business and your own creation of your brand to help other brands. That's exactly the message that they need to take from you as well. Because if you can do something that, it sounds cliche, but if you can find your angle towards something you love and something that kind of fills your cup, it's going to make the whole process better. It's going to make the work more enjoyable, and it's going to, all ships rise with the tide. It's going to help everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that. I do think, sometimes people are afraid to niche down, and especially with something as big as the food industry, there is opportunity for everyone. But I would say, almost any industry, if that's your passion, you can find your own niche there.
I totally agree. Thanks again, Katie.
Good. Yeah. Thank you. This is fun.
If you'd like to learn more about the CyberDogs experience, check us out online at cyberdogsmarketing.com for updated blogs, new podcast episodes, examples of previous work, and the brands we have and are currently working with, and much, much more.